Now, a good way to understand how playing with different factors would change the diversity of an ecosystem is looking at island diversity. Look at Southeastern Asia, for example, in that there's going to be a lot of islands between Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and other islands of that area. Some islands will be smaller than others, some islands will be closer to each other than others will, and some islands will be far or close from the continents. All of these will be important factors in determining the diversity that exists in those ecosystems. First of all, the size of the island absolutely matters. We talked about this before in the previous video, the idea that the size of a habitat matters because the bigger the habitat is, the greater the chance that species will be able to have less competition with each other and assume different niches within the ecosystem, and therefore coexistence of different species. So the numbers of species in a habitat will largely be based on its size. But that's not the only thing that matters when you talk about island diversity. It's also the distance from the mainland that will matter. Before we talk about that, let's think about extinction versus immigration rates, okay? Now, if immigration is really high, that means people are coming to the island all the time. New animals are coming to the island all the time. That's going to make extinction very, very low in the island because if the organism doesn't really make it in the island, more organisms can come over. And so that's going to keep the population numbers high if the immigration is very high, right? But if the immigration is really low, then extinction is likely to increase because of that, right? So you see the difference there. Now that they have that in your mind, and that's what the graph on the left side is showing, when immigration is high, extinction is low, and vice versa. Now there is also an equilibrium number, or a balance point, where the rate of immigration and the rate of extinction are the same. And basically what that means, that's the point at which the number of species in that ecosystem will stay pretty much constant, because the competition is making some of them go extinct, but there's a constant influx of immigration that's exactly replacing that. That balance point depends on a variety of factors. Let's look first at what size does. Now, in the graph in the middle, you see how the size of the island is going to matter. Now, I'm going to trace this in a different color to highlight what I'm talking about. First, let's look at the small island. Now, the small island, here is the immigration line, and here's the extinction line, right, for the small island. Now, notice that the balance point is a little bit to the left. That means that that island probably can sustain, in most cases, a smaller number of species because it's a small island. So that's just what we talked about before. Because it's a small island, the balance point is going to be smaller because competition is going to be greater on a small island. On a larger island, more species can live there, so that means more species can immigrate, and before you can get to that extinction point where the extinction balances the immigration rates. So competition is the factor there. But also, the distance from the mainland is also going to be a factor. If the island is really far from the mainland, and let's look at that over here. This is the lines that represents the islands which are far. That's going to make immigration a little bit hard to happen because so far it's more difficult for new species to replace the species which are going extinct. But that's also going to reduce competition from new arriving members, and that means that the balance point is going to be a little bit lower. Less people are going to be living in that island because the immigration is lower, and extinction rates are likely to be higher because there's less people coming over to replace the ones which are dying off in the ecosystem. Meanwhile, an island that is near, which is the other set of lines, will have greater competition and greater immigration, and that means that there's going to be a greater number of species that can possibly be maintained there, since the likelihood of different species making it to the island is also going to be higher since it's so closer to the mainland. Meanwhile, the one that's further, the likelihood of a bunch of different kinds of species making it, it's going to be rarer. It's more likely that only a few will accidentally end up in the island that's so far away. So as you can see, this is an example of how size, distance, and other things will affect the diversity of an ecosystem, and looking at island diversity is a classic example of it.